I want to ask you something before we even get into this. Think about the last time that you just stopped trying at work, right? Not dramatically, because you didn't flip a table, you didn't send a resignation letter, you didn't make a scene, right? You just sort of pulled back. Started doing enough to not get in trouble, right? Stopped volunteering for things and just went a little quiet. Now, what made you do that? And if you're new here, I'm Jen. I help small business owners lead other humans like a human. I'm willing to bet that it wasn't laziness, right? Something happened first. There was something that told you it wasn't safe or worth it or even possible to give more. And then you made a completely rational decision to protect yourself. That's what this video is about, because in 2022, the internet gave that behavior a name, and they called it quiet quitting, and then proceeded to spend about 6 months debating whether employees had become too soft, too entitled, too checked out, and almost nobody asked the more interesting question, which is, what made them that way? So today we're going to answer that, and we're going to do it through the story of a man who we all know and love, who quiet quit so loudly that we called it a solo career. Michael Jackson didn't invent disengagement, but he might be its most instructive case study. Picture it. May 16th, 1983. NBC airs a Motown 25th anniversary special. 47 million people are watching. And Michael Jackson, who at this point has spent his entire life being managed, packaged, and sold by other people, walks out onto that stage and does something that nobody has ever seen before. He moonwalks, and the crowd loses its mind. Literally loses it. You can hear the exact moment it happens, right? There's this collective gasp that turns into just this roar. And it's one of the most electric 30 seconds in television history. And then, quietly, almost immediately after, Michael Jackson begins the process of separating from Motown. Legally, creatively, permanently. Now, here's what I want you to notice. We don't call that quiet quitting. We call it a career pivot. We call it artistic evolution, right? We call it the birth of the king of pop, because he was Michael Jackson. And what came next was Thriller. So the story gets a really triumphant ending. But strip away the outcome for a second. Just strip away the fame and the genius and the hindsight. And what you have is a profoundly talented person who's been controlled, constrained, and creatively suppressed for his entire professional life, and who finally found a way out. And that's the story we're telling today. Not the moonwalk, the exit. So let's go back to 2022 for a second. There's a guy named, I think it was Zaid Khan, posts a TikTok. It's maybe a minute long, right? And he says something like, I'm not going above and beyond at work anymore. I'm doing my job, and that's it. And he calls it quiet quitting. The video goes viral, right? Like, think pieces start to explode, HR departments panic, Wall Street Journal runs a headline, and then the entire conversation, almost without exception, frames this as an employee problem, right? Workers are lazy, Gen Z has no work ethic, people don't want to work anymore. That's my favorite. But here's what organizational psychology actually says. Disengagement is a trailing indicator. That means by the time that you can see it, by the time that someone has visibly pulled back, something has already been wrong for a while, right? The disengagement didn't cause the problem. The disengagement is the problem announcing itself. It's the fever, not the virus. Gallup has been measuring employee engagement for decades, and their data is remarkably consistent because the number one driver of engagement or disengagement is the direct manager. Not the pay, not the benefits, not the ping pong table, the manager. So when we saw this wave of quiet quitting in 2022 and asked, what's wrong with these employees, we were looking at the wrong person. The right question was always, what happened to them? And to answer that, I want to go back even further than 2022. And I want to go back to Gary, Indiana, sometime around 1964, way before I was born, because Joe Jackson had a management philosophy, and it's one of the most efficient quiet quitting machines that I've ever studied. Joe Jackson wanted his sons to succeed. I think that that is genuinely true. I think he believed that the way to get them there was through discipline, pressure, and control, right? He drilled them relentlessly. He managed their image, he decided what they wore, how they performed, who they performed for, and what happened to the money. And it worked in the narrowest possible sense. Jackson 5 became one of the most successful acts in Motown history, right? The machine produced results. But here's what the machine also produced. It produced 5 boys and eventually 1 man who learned to perform under threat instead of inspiration, who understood that the cost of a mistake was humiliation, who got very, very good at doing exactly what they were told. And here's the leadership insight that I want you to sit with, because this one shows up everywhere. Compliance is not engagement. Compliance is what you get when someone is more afraid of the consequences of not performing than they are inspired by the possibility of performing. It looks like engagement from the outside, right? The work gets done, the metrics are fine, the Jackson 5 are selling out shows, everything looks great. But underneath, the person is running on completely different fuel. They're not giving you their best. They are giving you their minimum safe output. And the moment that threat eases, or the moment they find another option, they're gone. Joe Jackson built an extraordinarily compliant group of performers. What he did not build was a psychologically safe environment where Michael could figure out what he actually had to offer. That would take someone else entirely, but we'll get there. For now, I want to ask you to think about your own team or your own manager and ask yourself honestly, is the engagement you're seeing real? Or is it compliance wearing engagement's clothes? Because they look identical from the outside, until they don't. Michael Jackson has said in interviews, and this is documented, it's not rumor, it was even in the biopic, that his father used to call him Big Nose, casually, as a descriptor, as though it were kind of just a fact about him, like his height or his shoe size. But he was a child. Now, I want to be precise about why this matters from a leadership standpoint, because it's not just that it was cruel. It's the type of cruelty that did the damage, right? There's a distinction in feedback theory between behavioral feedback and identity feedback. Behavioral feedback sounds like, that run through wasn't tight enough, let's go again. It's about something that you did. It implies that you can do something different, right? It leaves your sense of self intact. Whereas identity feedback sounds like, you look wrong. You're not as talented as your brother. You're the problem, right? It's not about what you did. It's about who you are. And the reason that it's so destructive is that there's nothing that you can do with it. You can't fix being wrong, right? You can't improve being the problem. So people do the only thing that they can. They hide. They manage perception instead of developing skill. And Michael Jackson spent much of his life trying to resolve feedback that he received as a child about his appearance. That's not a tabloid observation, right? That's a case study in what identity level criticism does to a person over time. And before you think, I would never say something like that to someone on my team, I want to gently push back. Identity feedback doesn't always sound like Big Nose, right? Sometimes it sounds like, you're just not a strategic thinker. You've never really been a culture fit here. I don't think you want it badly enough, right? Those are identity statements. That's not feedback. Those are verdicts. And they give the person nothing to work with and everything to be ashamed of. Good feedback is specific. It's tied to behavior, not character. And it's delivered in a way that leaves the person feeling capable of changing, right? And it assumes the best about why they fell short. That's a whole model. It sounds simple, right? It is genuinely hard. And if you want actual scripts for how to do it in real conversations, I will mention something in a minute. But first, let's talk about what Michael did with all of this, because his response to being controlled and criticized and constrained wasn't to rage. It was to go quiet and then to leave. When Michael Jackson moved from Motown to Epic Records, it wasn't some dramatic blow up. There was no public feud, no explosive resignation. It was just a quiet, deliberate decision made by a young man who had done the math and realized the environment he was in would never let him become what he actually was. And the first thing he did when he got there, he wrote, "Don't stop till you get enough," entirely by himself. Every note, and it went to number 1. Think about that. This capacity had existed inside him the entire time that he was at Motown. creativity, the instinct, the songwriting. It was always there, right? The environment just had no interest in it. The environment wanted what it already knew how to sell. And this is what I want leaders to understand about the people on their teams who have gone quiet. The quiet is not evidence that there's nothing there. In most cases, the quiet is evidence that they stopped believing the environment wanted what they actually had. That is a heartbreaking and completely reversible situation if you catch it in time. The window matters, because what happens when people go quiet for too long is something that psychologists call learned helplessness, right? They stop trying, not because they don't care, but because they've been taught by experience that trying doesn't produce results. And at a certain point, even if the environment changes, they don't believe it because they've been trained not to. Michael left before that happened to him. A lot of people on your team won't. They'll stay. They'll go through the motions, right? And every month that they spend in an environment that doesn't want what they have, the gap between their potential and their output gets just a little bit wider. And that gap has a name, and it's not quiet quitting. It's waste. Okay, stepping out of the Michael Jackson story for a second, because this feedback section is exactly where I want to mention something. Everything I just described, the difference between behavioral and identity feedback, what good feedback actually looks like, right? How to have a conversation with someone who's clearly pulled back. These are things that are genuinely hard to do in the moment. Not because you don't understand them, but because when you are standing in front of a real person and the stakes feel real, the words often don't come out the way that you planned. So I built a workbook for that exact moment. And it's for the hard conversations that most managers and employees keep rehearsing in their heads and then never actually have, right? It has scripts, real examples, the feedback method that I've been kind of refining for years, and it's built for both sides of the table, right? If you're a manager trying to figure out how to say something difficult, it's for you. If you're an individual contributor who needs to have a conversation upward that feels terrifying, it is absolutely for you too. You can even use it in your personal relationships, right? Link is in the description. Okay, back to Michael. I've spent a lot of this video on the environments that failed Michael Jackson, so I want to give real time to the one that didn't. Quincy Jones. Their collaboration produced Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad, right? Collectively, some of the best-selling music ever made. And what I find fascinating, beyond the music, is how Quincy has described the way that they actually work together. He didn't want Michael to feel like a performer being directed, right? He wanted him to feel like an artist making decisions. Read that again, because that sentence is a complete leadership philosophy in 12 words. Quincy created conditions where Michael's instincts were treated as data, not obstacles to manage around. Where his ideas were taken seriously before they were evaluated, right? Where the relationship was generative, not extractive. Where there was room to fail and room to push and room to be exactly as completely strange and brilliant as he actually was. And Michael responded exactly the way that disengaged talent always responds when they find a safe environment. He exploded, but not in a destructive way, right? In the way that happens when someone who's been holding themselves in finally gets room to expand, right? The ideas came faster. The standards got higher, not because someone demanded it, but because he demanded it of himself. The output became extraordinary, right? Thriller is not just a great album. It's a document of what psychological safety produces when it meets extraordinary talent. And here's what I want you to take from that if you are in any kind of leadership position. You probably have someone on your team right now who has a thriller in them, right? And they are not making it. Not because they can't, but because nothing in their current environment has told them that it's safe to try. And that is both a tragedy and an opportunity because you can change it. Not with a big speech and not with a new initiative, right? But with something much simpler. Ask them what they think. And then listen. And then do something with what they said. That's the Quincy Jones method. It is not complicated. It's just unfortunately very rare. There's a song, and I know you know it, called Man in the Mirror. It's almost always read as an individual accountability anthem. Change yourself before you try to change the world. And that is a valid reading. But I want to offer a different one. If you're someone in a leadership position and you've watched someone on your team go quiet, the man in the mirror is not your disengaged employee. It's you. The mirror is asking you a question. And the question is, what did I do to make engagement feel dangerous here? Not what did they do? What did you do? What did the environment do? What signals did you send over time that told this person it wasn't worth showing up fully? It's a really hard question. I know it is. And I'm not asking you to own things that aren't yours, right? Some disengagement isn't always about leadership. Some people bring their own history, and that's a very real thing. But most disengagement is a response. And if you're willing to look at it that way, you get access to information that most leaders never get. Because most leaders are so focused on the behavior that they can see that they never ask what produced it. The employees who have gone quiet on your team are not broken. They are answering a question your environment asked. And if you can get curious enough to figure out what question that was, you can change the answer. So I want to close this talking directly to the individual contributors watching. If you have pulled back at work, right? If you've gone quiet, stopped raising your hand, started doing just enough to keep the lights on, I'm not here to tell you that's fine and that you should keep doing it. That's not what this is. But I am here to tell you this. It makes sense. It makes sense as a response to an environment that gave you evidence, real evidence, that full engagement wasn't safe or wasn't valued or wasn't going to go anywhere, right? You didn't become a different person. You made a rational calculation based on the data that you had. Michael Jackson didn't become less talented at Motown. He became less willing to offer what he had. And who could blame him, right? The environment wasn't built for what he actually was. It was built for what it already knew how to sell. The version of you that's currently holding back has a thriller in you too. And I hope genuinely that you find or build or fight for the environment where it gets to come out. That might mean a hard conversation with your manager, right? It might mean finding your own Quincy Jones somewhere in your organization. It might mean eventually an off-the-wall moment where you leave and you go somewhere that was waiting for exactly what you have. Whatever it is, the disengagement was never the problem. It was the signal. And signals can be read, and things that can be read can be changed. If this hit something real for you, please share it with a teammate, with your manager, with someone you know who's been quiet for a little too long and absolutely deserves to be seen. And if you want to go deeper, the hard conversations, the actual scripts, the feedback method, that workbook is in the description below, right? It exists because knowing this and doing this are two completely different things. I'll see you in the next one.